So yes, the latest Ratistics. So I've had to spend all day practicing saying that word, so I've got it off pat now. So here we go. This is the Eastern Bay Songbird project, which is, as you know, it's on a meteoric rise and has been for the last 4 years. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of the history in terms of how the project has grown. And I'm going to show all of the results combined with the valued partners of the project that have been mentioned already tonight. So the Mission Bay and Kohima Residents Association, especially led by Alan Minson and colleagues, and the Whenua Rangatira Bastion Point project by Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. Because I think these all these projects are working very closely together, and I think they're all indicative of our brave new world, where predatory New Zealand is going to occur through community powers. So this is about residents getting out into the community and making things better on their local patch. And as mentioned, it's my local patch as well. So I'm really happy to be living here in Kohima, just up the road from most of you. So here we are in Fortress Eastern Bays, and we are very well protected by the looks of things. Each one of these yellow dots is a trap or a bait station, and we have over 2,800 of them out there protecting us from nasty little creatures with teeth and claws as we speak. This is actually a map similar to the one that Michelle showed earlier, but Michelle gave a very modest 50-meter buffer around each trap. And I decided to be a bit less modest and put 100 meters circle around each trap, just to see what happens. And what you discover is that nearly everywhere in this region is within 100 meters of a device set by either the Eastern Bay Songbird project or one of its partners, which I think is actually an extraordinary achievement. You can also see by this exactly how much protected area you have if we consider that within 100 meters of every device, and these are active devices, I should say, if you consider that within 100 meters of each device is a protected area in some sense, then our total protected area is about 1,500 hectares. And I think you should know that that is a larger conservation sanctuary than Codfish Island. So I'm confidently expecting the Department of Conservation to be in touch, looking for homes for kakapo any moment now, and seeing this as the obvious place to put them. It's about the same size as Motutapu Island. So it's actually a very significant area of conservation estate. Now, I'm going to show how the traps have grown. I'm just going to see if I can, yes. So I'm just going to show how the trap placement has grown since 2017. So this is going to be a motion picture. I hope you've all got your popcorn ready. And as the cursor goes along the top, you'll see this is the change of date. So we're going to start in about October 2017. So that was just a month or two after the incorporation of the project. And as you can see, there were some things already in place at that point. But as the cursor goes along the top, you'll see how things changed. So let me see if I can get that running. So we start in 2017, and things are happening very quickly. But it really takes off through 2018. That's when we really start seeing the coverage. That's the end of 2018 now. Now, 2019 is kind of filling in the gaps. There's still a lot of gaps being filled in, a lot of color appearing on the map there. We're into 2020. Now, everything went wrong all over the world in 2020, but you can still see there's still quite a lot of little bits of activity here and there. And then in 2021, this year, you see the expansion out into the western side, into Remoera. So that's a kind of brief history of everything that matters in the Eastern Bays since 2017. Now, where would we be if it weren't for these community-led projects? Well, for many, many years, people have been diligently trapping and doing pest control in the parks and reserves around the area. And there's been a lot of fantastic work being done there. So here we have Cape Selwyn Bush, St. John's Bush, Tahuna Ture, Maddles Farm, Churchill Park, lots of great stuff going on. But what you'll notice is the gaps between those projects. And so the with and without map looks like that. It's kind of like the lights have gone on since 2017. Everything has, all those gaps between reserves have been joined up. And what we're going to see is that this has made a very fundamental difference to what's going on in the reserves. So I won't give away too much of the end of the story just yet, but there's good stuff to come along those lines. So that's in terms of what's been set out, the traps that have been set out. What about what has been achieved? What are the results from all of this effort? So what I'm going to show now is the catches, and I'm still showing the Eastern Bay Songbird project along with its partners of Mission Bay Kohimarama Residents Association and the Ngāti Whātua Orake projects. And we'll just see how the catches, so this is of all pest species, rats, mice, possums, hedgehogs, and a stoat. We'll see how those catches have grown since the beginning of the project, which I'm taking to be October 2017. So there it goes. And we are now at over 4,000 predators removed from this area. That's actually quite astonishing, 4,000. If you had told me that at the beginning of the project, when I was helping to get the project set up on Catch IT, I would have been very surprised indeed. One thing that's quite interesting here is that over the last 2 years, the catch rate has been not just roughly constant, it's been extraordinarily stable. And as a statistician, I'm used to seeing data having a lot more variability than this. So I'm not really quite sure what to make of this. There's been roughly 120 catches per month over the last 2 years. Now, I'm being very speculative here, so don't take this as a conclusion, it's just a speculation. But it makes me wonder whether perhaps the trap coverage that exists is already saturating everything that is available coming into the area that's being trapped. And that it may be that what we actually need to do is identify remaining little pockets where there aren't devices, rather than necessarily filling in the gaps where there already are devices. It may be that we need to find those little reservoirs where rats and possums are still breeding and heading out into our trapping area from there. So that's just a little thought for people to consider. Perhaps we've sort of reached the rate at which we're going to make catches, and from here on it's a question of finding where those animals are still coming into our area from. This is the heat map of all catches over the 4 years. That's about 4,400 in total. And the various different suspects are rats, by far the most catches, These numbers differ a little bit from the ones that Michelle showed, because Michelle was showing the ones that include all of the reserves as well. So I'll show you those in a moment as well. But this is just the residential and infill trapping schemes. So it's nearly 3,000 rats, 850 possums. Those are the two big ones. Mice are becoming quite a feature as well. Mice are, there were quite low numbers of mice, and I think what can happen is that as rats are removed, mice do start to become more prominent in trapping results, partly because rats actually dominate mice in getting to the traps. So mice are a bit more nervous about eating yummy food when there are rats about. So if we put all of the projects in, including the reserves and parks, this is what we get, 6,600 catches over that 4-year period. And interestingly, the Eastern Bay Songbird project by itself constitutes 56% of all that has been caught in this area over the last 4 years. So that's quite interesting. And then if we add the partner organizations as well, the partner projects, that comes to 66%. So 2/3 of what is being caught now in the Eastern Bays is due to this project and its close partners. And just to identify a few of those hotspots on the map, you can see that still it's the reserve areas and the areas of bush that are the highest catch rates. But I think we're doing a tremendous job in maintaining the pressure over the whole area so that those reserve areas are going to benefit from that. And this is the with and without. And I think it's just worth reflecting on where we would be if community initiatives like this one hadn't started their meteoric rise a few years ago. We would still be just focusing on these reserves, and honestly, nothing would change, because between the reserves, there would still be all of this potential for predators to breed and then repopulate the reserves. So really, I think of Alice in Wonderland and the Red Queen. It takes all the running that you can do to stay in the same place. If you're leaving reserves just as isolates and you're not going to join the dots in between them, then you're going to keep running, but you're not actually going to get any further. And I think that's the marvelous contribution of this project and projects like it. So let's see the movie. And these are all predator catches from 2017 to the present. And it will follow a reasonably similar pattern to the trap layout that I showed earlier. So we're going to start at the end of 2017, and there's not a lot going on. But as time goes forward, we'll see what the catches that have been reported under the project and its partners have done. So let's just start that. So we're going into 2018. There are not many traps out yet, but they're starting to appear, and the catches are really starting to rise. And that Pourewa Valley project is taking off at that point. And then into 2019, this is where it comes into its heyday. This has really taken off. So a lot of color has filled up that map in 2019. We're now going into the middle of 2020. And as you'll remember, a lot of strange things happen. This is lockdown time, and it does slow down. So we do see some results of that. And then into 2021, it recovered a bit, and then it's just gone a little bit quiet in the very most recent times. So it's telling a story. It's telling a social commentary story, as well as what's actually going on in terms of pests. So you'll all be interested in not just a body count. We want to know what sort of impact are we actually having. Can we measure anything that all of this hard work has actually accomplished? And it's great to see the bird count data and the weather data becoming emerging, because that's going to be the real hallmark of success, is going to be detecting changes in our natives that are coming back and repopulating due to this hard work. But there is something else we can do while we're still waiting for those results to really establish. And those of you who have been to these meetings beforehand will have seen me talking about this before. So because we've got all of these reserves and parks in our area, we actually have data going back a long time from those, as much as, I think the earliest one might be to about 2005 in Keuper Bush. So we've got years of data in some of these reserves. But in particular, we've got a lot of data from about 2015 onwards in several of the reserves in the Eastern Bays. And so what we can do is look to see whether the catches in the reserves changed in any way when the community-led projects began. So as you saw, the community project was really taking off in about 2018. So I think what we could expect is that we might see some knock-on effects in the reserves from 2019 onwards, if we're going to see any. So let's see if we can find anything out. These are the reserves that have records going back to 2015 or beforehand. So it's a reasonably good coverage of the reserves around the area. Now, what I'm going to show you is the rat catches that have taken place per trap check. So we're controlling for the amount of effort going into rat trapping. The rat catches per trap check in all of those parks, so just these ones, since 2015. And I've showed you this before in previous meetings. And that was as far as we got to at the time that you last heard the story. And that was 2019. That was the first year that we expected to see any knock-on effects. And at the time, I talked about these variability bands. You can draw these kind of lines, and they show what we would expect based on ordinary variability, based on what has happened from 2015 up to 2018. That's where you would expect the catch rate to be for 2019. But instead, it was way down there. And that is, by any measure, absolutely extraordinary. That is completely unexpected. Those of you who have any scientific training will recognize this little thing called the p-value. And basically, the smaller it is, the more impressive is your result. In other words, the further away from ordinary chance has that result gone. And if the p-value is 0, it's as small as it could possibly be. So we're basically saying that this was out of this world extraordinary. Now, I'm sure you want to know what happened after that. So what has happened from 2020 and 2021? Let's have a look. Story continues. Okay, so here we are, and it's a little bit, perhaps it's not the story you would have liked to have seen, but I would like to point out that this is still, by any standards, an extremely strong result. So that little p is still extremely small. It's way beyond the threshold for what we call scientific conclusiveness. It's in fact more than 10 times smaller than that threshold. So had we not seen that 2019 result, and if we'd only seen this, we would have been really impressed. So that's pretty good. I would not like anybody to think that it's not good. It's great. but it hasn't the same huge lead, and it would be interesting to see what happens into the future from here. What about possums? So these are the other big species that this project is targeting. Let's have a look at this. And once again, we have the story up as far as 2019, which is what you saw last time. And there it goes. And we had those ordinary bounds, and we had that tiny pea. And this is what's happened to possums since then. It was already extraordinary in 2019, and it's now even more extraordinary in 2021. So I suspect that we have a lot of impact from the reserve fringe trapping that's going on in the Pourewa Valley and the Churchill Park areas. And those are places where possums were breeding and were repopulating the reserves year in, year out. And that concerted effort has really knocked that population down to something like way less than a quarter of what it was before. So all of this, we can't exactly equate numbers that we trap with numbers that are alive, but it is pretty indicative of something very extraordinary that's happened in the area. So it would be even more compelling if we discovered that we don't see the same results for those species that are not targeted by the infill project. And it turns out that that is also the case. So if we look at mice and hedgehogs, for example, mice are, the numbers are growing, but in terms of the number of mice that are available in the area, this is really probably a very small number. And hedgehogs, again, it's a different order of magnitude to what we're seeing from the rats and the possums. So this is what the residential and community-led projects are targeting. Sorry, these two are what the projects are targeting, whereas these two are much lesser players in the infill trapping. So what's happened with these two, mice and hedgehogs? So the mice were very interesting because back in 2019, just as we were seeing this big drop in rats, we also saw something of a rise in mice. And we were getting a little bit worried about that because does that mean that you're taking out one threat and replacing it with a different one? And it's kind of interesting, and there are far more ecologically qualified people than I am here on this call. But it's interesting to notice that the mouse trace, which is now back within its ordinary bounds after that rise, and it's kind of the mirror image of the rat trace. So what we saw with rats was that the rats had a massive decline in 2019, and then they rose, and then they rose a bit more. And we've got the mice doing the mirror image of that. And I think the ecologists out there would be maybe able to draw a few hypotheses from that. We're not concluding anything, but I think it's suggestive that there's a lot of interplay going on between rats and mice. But it's also important to notice that we've been catching a lot more mice in the infill projects still since then, since 2019. And this may be also having an impact on what's going on in the reserves. So remember, these numbers are just in the reserves. And in terms of hedgehogs, there's nothing unusual going on. They've just been bobbing along at their usual rate pretty much since 2015. So again, perhaps as the rats and possums are removed, perhaps a little bit more effort may be directed towards hedgehogs. And I think that probably what we're seeing is a big impact, especially with possums, of all this hard work that's going on. For example, this is the Pourewa Valley, and you can see along the railway line, there's lots and lots of possum habitat. that wasn't under any form of control until this project began. And I think year in, year out, you've got Kepper bush and Selwyn bush. So that it's Kepper bush there. And people were working very hard trapping in Kepper bush. And year in, year out, possums were breeding in this area and then pushing back in. And so it was that question of doing all the running you can to stay in the same place. And now that we've got the community-led project that's filling in all of those gaps, it's removing those reservoirs where pests can breed and they would otherwise move into the reserves from those places. My guess is that there are still a few places waiting to be found where the pests are still breeding. And I'm just speculating that that might be why we're seeing that kind of constant increase. I meant to say, when I showed the constant increase of 120 catches per month in the Eastern Bay Songbird and partner projects, that's kind of really strange when you think of how many different things have happened over that period of time. Those 2 years, we've had lots of trap handouts, so that the number of traps has increased massively. We've had lockdowns, we've had all sorts of things going on, and yet the numbers have stayed constant at about 120 per month. And I think that's very interesting. And that's what makes me wonder whether this little pocket's still waiting to be identified. So, of course, just looking in Kepper and Selwyn bush alone, when you take out all of those possums that are breeding in this area, which is what's been accomplished, then there's far fewer to trap in the reserves themselves. So this is the possum results, possum catches just for Kepper and Selwyn bush since 2015. So what does it all mean? What it means is that I think we have compelling evidence that the Eastern Bay Songbird and partners have created what we can now confirm is a sustained drop in pest numbers throughout the region. I think this is awesome progress, really impressive. And it's down to everybody's hard work. Many of you on this call have done an extraordinary job of making this come about. And I think you deserve a very impressive lockdown party for that achievement. So I thought I would finish off with something that's not such good news, and it's nothing. It's not the fault of any of us here, but it's something that we all need to be aware of, and it's this fellow, which is, of course, New Zealand's public enemy #1. And the bad news is that they have been invading Motutapu and Rangitoto Islands over the last 2 years, well, since early 2020. I think May 2020 was when it was first found that there was a stoat on the island. And although stoats do get to these islands from time to time, this is extraordinarily unusual that there have been at least 2 that have been trapped dead, and probably at least 2 still living on the island, and possibly even more than 2. So we're talking about 4 to 5 stoats have made their way to Rangitoto and Motutapu since May last year. And these islands are they're pest-free sanctuaries, or they're meant to be. They're home to extremely precious natives such as takahe, tieke, saddleback, kiwi, and the shore plover, which is one that I'd like to mention. And yeah, this is just the chronology of the stoat captures. So we know that there were 2 in late 2020 dead, but there's the Department of Conservation is still finding droppings, so stoat scat, and the latest droppings were picked up in July. All of the droppings are sent for DNA analysis, but unfortunately, this is a very delicate job, and you get very poor quality DNA out of a dropping. So when an animal has a poop, a little bit of its own DNA is to be found in that, because it's shedding its own skin cells and so on within the droppings. So there's a tiny amount of the animal's own DNA in that. We can process that DNA in the lab, and we can try to identify how many different animals we have on the island. But the problem is that the DNA results are often very inconclusive because of such poor quality results. So that's why we're not currently sure. This was an analysis I was doing just last week. And so it's very hot off the press. We are not currently sure if we are getting DNA actively from 2 different animals, or more than 2, or just 1. But one thing we do know is that there is at least 1 stoat still alive on Motutapu, and probably more. Back in February, we're pretty sure that we had at least 2. By some miracle, all of the stoats that have been picked up have all been males, which means that at the moment we don't have a breeding population. And I don't know how many of you know about stoat biology, but female stoats you can consider to be perpetually pregnant. So female stoats, they have a unique breeding system, and baby female stoats are actually impregnated by adult males while they're still kits in the nest. And so as soon as a female stoat matures, it's already pregnant. And this means that if 1 female stoat gets to the island, we could be in real trouble. DOC has so far put in at least $250,000 to try to find these stoats and remove them. And so far it's succeeded in trapping 2. And we think there are two more. The first single stoat cost $86,000 to trap. That's a lot of money to catch 1 stoat. And this is one of our most precious species that lives on the island, the shore plover. And there are only 250 of these birds in existence. So it's almost as threatened as the kakapo. It doesn't have nearly the same press as the kakapo, but there were 10 on the island, and 3 were killed last year by stoats. So you can imagine the outcry if we lost 3 kakapo to a stoat hit. Well, something just about as bad as that is happening on the islands that are very close to us. So how do the stoats get there? And this is, of course, the big mystery. So here's Motutapu and Rangitoto, they're basically joined together. There's access from Devonport, and there's access from our area, and there's access from Howick Music Point, and that's Brown's Island there. There would potentially be access from Waiheke as well, but genetically we can tell that they're not coming from there. So we know that Waiheke is not the source. They're coming from somewhere in the Auckland mainland, and we don't know where. But they're probably the strongest suspicion is that it may well be from the Tamaki River. We are suspecting that there's been a bit of a stop-off on Brown's Island, and that stoats may be swept, for example, by floodwaters, or we don't know what it is that pushes them out there, but they are strong swimmers. They can swim a long way, and once they're here, then that's where they might seek to go, because this is not really enough of a place for a stoat to live. It may well be interested in finding a bigger place. So Out here in the east, we assume there are lots of stoats. We know for sure that in the Hunuas, there are lots and lots of stoats. I was tramping in the Hunuas earlier this year and just happened to meet a contractor, a trapping contractor, and he said that they'd recently put in Dock 250s, big network of Dock 250s in the Hunuas. And they had caught dozens of stoats in their earliest trapping. So I think it's very likely that out in this area, there are probably lots of stoats. Stoats range, each individual stoat will range over a huge area. And that means that every so often they will come to us. They will turn up in our patch. They're very hard to find in trekking tunnels or traps. It's really hard to know when you have a stoat that's roaming around in the Ōrākei local board. So probably they are right at the moment, but we don't have any particular sightings or monitoring results that have picked them up for a while. So this is, it's not definite, but it is a suspected mechanism that this is how they're getting to Motu Tapu. And of course, they could be coming from completely the opposite direction. But right at the moment, anything that we can do in this area to help would be really worthwhile. So this is what we've caught. Since 2018, this is all the projects, reserves and community-led, all the stoats that have been caught in the Eastern Bays since 2018. And that's how I knew what Michelle was using in her data, because there are 3 of them. One from the Eastern Bays Songbird project and 2 others. One was Kepa Bush that was caught in a Tim's trap in April 2018. One was caught by roadkill and reported by Julie Robson in 2019. I'm not sure if Julie was the person who ran it over or just the person who found it, but that's how we picked that one up. And one in a snappy trap in Waiotaki in March this year, which is sort of well in the danger zone for when they might have been traveling to the islands. And so what you'll notice there is that none of these catches were deliberately setting out to catch a stoat. They were all incidental catches. And indeed, 1/3 of them was completely accidental, and it wasn't even in a trap at all. It was just because it was somebody who was super alert who noticed it and reported it that we even know that that one took place. And that's what I'd like to put in a bit of a plea for today. We all need to be really vigilant for stoats. And if there are any stoat sightings, we need to actually get that data recorded so that we know where to go. So what can we do about it? Report any sightings. I'm volunteering Michelle to take them in here, so I'm sure she won't mind. But basically, as long as somebody who's going to get that data into the system is notified about it, that's what you need to do. But I'm actually going to ask for more than that. I'm going to ask for DNA samples. So it would be extremely helpful if we were able to catch stoats on this part of the mainland and send them for DNA analysis, because that will be our chance of being able to distinguish whether they're coming from here or from Devonport. We don't know for sure that we'd be able to pick up DNA differences, genetic differences between those 2 places, but it's possible. And at the moment, we have no stoat DNA from this part of town. So it would be really worthwhile for science, and not just for this year, but for a decade to come, even 2 decades to come, if we could start building up our knowledge of what stoat genetics look like throughout the Auckland area. So if you were, should I say, fortunate or unfortunate enough to find a stoat in a trap, my request is, and this is not very nice, I'm sorry, but please could you cut off the tail as soon as you can. It just needs to be, let's say, about 10 centimeters of tail, but it needs to be actual tissue, not just fur. It needs to be actual meaty bit, if you like, tissue. Cut it off while the animal is as fresh as you possibly can make it. So please don't just sort of go home and think, oh, I'll take it. I'll take a snip when I go back again next week. Please let someone know. And there are people who would be willing to actually make a special trip out just to cut off a stoat tail if you tell them where it is. So just make sure it's done as quickly as possible, because otherwise the DNA starts to deteriorate and we won't necessarily get anything useful from it. If you are good at finding stoat scat, or if you have a super dog in your possession, this is what it looks like. And even if you suspect that it's stoat scat, we can possibly get DNA out of that scat if it's fresh. So again, as quickly as you can, if you could put it in a bag, label where it came from, and in both cases, if you could freeze that sample in your home freezer as quickly as you can, that will help to stop the DNA from deteriorating until it's got into a proper lab storage facility. So that's everything I wanted to say. It's ending on a note where it's real conservation management in action. And what I found through this procedure is that Department of Conservation have been in touch with me because they want me to do genetic analysis. But it's just because of my link with Catch IT that I happen to know that there are all of these people who would be willing to put in serious effort to help this problem that are right in the zone where those stoats might be leaving from. And so it's something that not only do we need to join the dots in terms of putting traps everywhere throughout the city, but we also need to join the dots in terms of people, because often we've got all this enormous community effort, and we actually need that to feed through to what agencies like DOC and Council are doing. And all too often at the moment, there's actually not that link. So the link has been established just by chance on this occasion. And we are underway with initiatives to collect stoats and also Norway rats at the same time from throughout the Auckland area for the sake of the islands. And that initiative's being spearheaded by Auckland Council Rangers. So lots for us to do. And just remains for me to say thank you so much and keep up the good work.